28 cases, 7 levels. These are not the stories theme parks put in their brochures. From sudden ride malfunctions to riders being dropped 100 feet to the ground, these are the incidents that have left scars that will never heal. Let's begin at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Magic Carpet Ride. On July 8, 2021, during the National Cherry Festival in Traverse City, Michigan, a disaster occurred. The Magic Carpet Ride, which had been in operation, suddenly started to sway. The ride, sometimes called the Flying Carpet, had a long swinging arm with a passenger platform, which is the carpet. The arm swings the passenger platform back and forth, often going on a 360-degree loop, but on this day, it malfunctioned. As the ride moved, the whole construction started swaying violently back and forth, looking as if it might tip over. The operator quickly shut off the power and jumped clear of the controls, but this didn't stop it immediately. The ride's momentum kept it moving. Scared riders began screaming, and bystanders had to step in. 15 to 20 people rushed to the base of the ride. They grabbed on to the fencing and guardrails, using their collective weight to stabilize the swaying ride until it came to a complete stop. Once the motion died down, the safety restraints didn't release until staff manually unlocked the harnesses to help riders off one by one. No injuries were reported, and the ride was dismantled the next morning and sent back to its manufacturer for inspection. Monorail Fire, Disney World. On June 25, 1985, Monorail Silver arrived at the Epcot Center station with a flat tire. Before the next trip, staff replaced the flat tire with a backup, but a few minutes into the following journey, the backup tire also went flat, and this time, the passengers weren't so lucky. With no tire to separate them, the metal wheel rim started scraping the concrete beam, and this friction caused the sparks to ignite before setting the torn tire on fire. Smoke spread to the bottom of the car, and passengers began to panic. The monorail operates on an elevated beamway with no ground-level exit, so evacuation was extremely difficult. To make matters worse, there were no onboard fire detection systems, emergency exits, or even evacuation plans. Guests were trapped 30 feet above the ground as smoke filled the vehicle. The pilot radioed for help, but the longer they took, the slimmer their chances of coming out alive. 2 brave passengers decided to take matters into their own hands. They kicked out the windows, then forced open the door to reach a hatch leading to the roof. On the roof, they helped everyone in the silver car get out, pulled people out of the other vehicles, and slid down the front onto the track. Luckily, no one died. But 7 passengers were hospitalized due to smoke inhalation, while others had minor injuries that were treated at the scene. The last car was completely burnt, and the second-to-last car was damaged. Since then, new fire safety measures have been added, and monorail tires are inflated with inert nitrogen to reduce fire risk. Astronaut training. In Russia, a man was spinning 2 children on a 360-degree swing when it suddenly began to spin uncontrollably. At first, it seemed normal as the ride accelerated to achieve full rotation, but it quickly turned terrifying when it wouldn't stop. Their laughter turned into terrifying screams. The ride kept accelerating, spinning faster and faster as onlookers screamed for the operator to shut it down. Nothing worked. The rapid rotation made it look like astronauts going through high-G training, very chaotic and horrifying. After several minutes and many failed attempts, operators eventually cut the power wires to bring the ride to a gradual stop. When the children were finally escorted away, doctors were on standby, but fortunately, they were unharmed. The Ninja, Six Flags Mountain. The Ninja roller coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain was famous for the way it weaved in and out of the park's trees. Perched over wooden terrain, it earned the nickname the Black Belt of roller coasters. Its suspended design allowed the cars to glide beneath the track, swinging gracefully from side to side like a ninja slicing through the air, but not on this day. On July 7, 2014, around 6 p.m., passengers were riding the Ninja coaster when a train struck a tree branch that had fallen onto the track. The force caused the first car to derail, leaving it dangling from the track. The coaster stopped abruptly with 22 passengers trapped 40 feet above ground. Park staff called emergency services, but when firefighters arrived, the wooden terrain around the track made access difficult. Rescuers had to use aerial ladders and special equipment to reach the stranded passengers hanging beneath the track. Firefighters carefully climbed up and helped each rider out of their harness one at a time, guiding them down ladders or lifting them down with safety gear. The mood was tense. A single mistake could shake the derailed train and put passengers at further risk. After 3 long hours of work, all 22 passengers were safely evacuated. 4 people sustained minor injuries. The Ninja roller coaster was closed permanently in November 2015. Level 2. Skyway, Disney World. On February 14, 1999, 65-year-old part-time custodian Raymond Barlow was cleaning one of the Skyway platforms about an hour after the park opened. Unaware that he was there, other employees started up the Skyway system for the day. They didn't know it yet, but this decision would prove fatal. Startled by the fast-approaching gondola, Raymond grasped onto it and tried to climb inside, but it didn't work. He slipped and fell 40 feet below, hitting a tree on the way down before landing on a flower bed. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration ruled that the area where Raymond Barlow had been working violated federal safety codes. Disney was fined $4,500, and the Skyway ride, which had already been scheduled for closure, was permanently closed in November of that year. Atmosphere. The Atmosphere ride at Oaks Amusement Park in Portland is a giant swinging pendulum that builds momentum until it flips riders upside down in a full 360-degree loop. At least, that's what's supposed to happen. On June 14, 2023, the Atmosphere had been operating manually when it suddenly stopped mid-air. A mechanical fault had triggered the ride's emergency safety system, freezing the pendulum right as it reached the top of its arc. Because it stopped at the worst possible moment, riders were left dangling upside down 100 feet above the ground. Although the over-the-shoulder harnesses held all 25 riders securely in place, the inverted position left some riders feeling dizzy and nauseous. The safety system had done its job correctly, but it also meant the pendulum had to be carefully reset before it could move again. Operators and emergency crews could not simply release the riders manually while the gondola was stuck mid-air. Riders were stuck upside down for 30 long minutes. Engineers and operators carefully reset the system and restored power to the motors, allowing the pendulum to slowly rotate back under control. Once the gondola was lowered, staff and paramedics helped riders out of their seats one by one. Everyone walked away, shaken but safe. The Atmosphere was shut down for a year before reopening in June 2024, but its full 360-degree rotation remains suspended to this day. The Voyage, Holiday World. On June 4th, 2021, 47-year-old Dawn Yankovic and her 17-year-old son, Gunnar Merker, lined up at the station ready to board a wooden roller coaster called The Voyage. Up to then, the day at Holiday World and Splashin' Safari in Indiana had been just what the mother and son were looking for. The duo took their seats, ready for more fun, but this ride would turn out to be their last. The ride lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds, but when it returned to the station, Dawn had lost consciousness. First responders arrived within minutes and performed first aid, but she was completely unresponsive. She was transported to Memorial Hospital in Jasper, Indiana, where doctors tried desperately to save her life. Tragically, she was pronounced dead later that night. Although the roller coaster had operated as intended without malfunction, the Voyage was shut down for a day to conduct safety inspections. Later in July, the coroner's report stated that the cause of her death was exsanguination due to an evolution of the right internal thoracic artery. In other words, the physical forces exerted during the ride caused a critical artery to tear, resulting in severe internal bleeding. There was no design defect or malfunction of the Voyage. Her death was officially ruled an accident, and the Voyage remains open. Monorail Purple, Disney World. On July 5, 2009, around 2 a.m., while most of the park was closed, the Disney World monorail's coral, pink, and purple cars were transporting the final guests from the resort to their hotels. When Monorail Pink was ready to head back to the maintenance bay, it had to switch from the Epcot line to the Magic Kingdom Express line. But something went wrong. At a crucial moment, the operator became distracted and failed to complete the switch correctly. Monorail Purple was supposed to pull into the station, then switch beams to avoid a head-on collision, but it was mistakenly routed onto the same track as Monorail Pink. Because monorails travel at relatively high speeds and visibility is limited from inside the cab, the pilot of Purple, Austin Wernenberg, had little time to react. Despite hitting the emergency brake, his train collided head-on with Pink. The impact crushed the cab of Monorail Purple, and its 21-year-old pilot lost his life. The other pilot and guests sustained minor injuries. In the aftermath, Disney temporarily shut down the monorail system, retrained staff, and later introduced automated safety systems to prevent reoccurrence of similar collisions. Since Monorail Purple and Pink were damaged beyond repair, Disney introduced a Monorail Teal, made from the salvageable parts of both trains. Alright, let's hit pause on that for just a moment, as I want to give a massive shout out to this video sponsor, Private Internet Access VPN. Honestly, in this day and age, using the internet without a VPN is extremely risky. It would be like walking into a battlefield with no armor. That's why I use Private Internet Access to keep my online activity secure. Private Internet Access's VPN encrypts my connection on all devices and operating systems, basically scrambling all my data so that hackers, or even my internet provider, can't snoop on what I'm doing. That's a lifesaver when I'm using public Wi-Fi at an airport or cafe, for example, and I can protect up to 7 devices at once, which is unbelievably convenient. But my favorite part? The freedom. Sometimes a specific movie or show I want to watch is on Netflix, just not in the country I'm in. Well, with Private Internet Access, I can switch my virtual location with just one click and unlock entire libraries of content from other countries. You can also use this to get way better deals on flights, purchases, you name it. And to make it even better, Private Internet Access is offering you an amazing deal. Just use the link in the description and you can grab an incredible 83% discount and 4 months totally free. And with their 45-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support, you can try it completely risk-free. Thank you, Private Internet Access. Now, where were we? Let's get back to it. Level 3. Flying Chair. In January 2023, a tourist was swinging on a high-altitude cliff swing in Lingyang Mountain's scenic area, Ningbo, China. At the end of the first swing, part of the traction rope of the flying chair detached and began trailing dangerously behind the rider's seat. Bystanders screamed and the rider held on for dear life. For a few seconds, the chair kept swinging, and with each trip came the risk of falling off the chair. During the swing, the rider's leg collided with the frame steel pipe at speed with a terrifying crash on his way down. Again, on his way back up, he crashed into the frame. Luckily, he did not fall off the ride and was escorted safely from the chair. The ride was suspended immediately and taken out of service for inspection and repair. The rider broke his leg and ultimately required surgery, but he survived. Superstar. In July 2024, during the annual Chestival Fair at the University of Chester, what was intended as a fairground attraction quickly turned into a nightmare. The Superstar ride works by swinging riders high into the air on a rotating boom, but on this day, something shifted. At first, riders began to scream from the thrill when a panel suddenly detached from the fast-moving ride. The panel hurled through mid-air into the midst of bystanders who were watching. The impact sent shards of shattered glass flying in all directions. The broken piece of panel struck a 19-year-old student, Caitlin Colclough, who was immediately rushed to the hospital. The emergency stop was activated and the ride slowly came to a halt. The safety restraints stayed locked until passengers were manually released and escorted off safely. At the Countess of Chester Hospital, Caitlin was treated for concussion, whiplash, blurred vision, and dizziness. Luckily, a CT scan revealed no serious internal damage. The Superstar ride was immediately shut down and dismantled pending final investigations. Ferris wheel fall. In 2017, at the Central Carolina Fair in Greensboro, North Carolina, a Ferris wheel was in motion when one of its gondolas began tilting dangerously out of position. Each gondola on a Ferris wheel is designed to swing freely but remain upright using gravity and a secure locking mechanism that holds it to the wheel's frame. But on this ride, the locking mechanism that kept the gondola level failed. This caused the car to tilt outwards drastically. Since there were no seatbelt or restraining bars strong enough to hold them in place, the boys slid out through the opening. They began panicking, and a carnival worker risked his life to help. The employee, Albert Irwin, climbed up the Ferris wheel to manually adjust the gondola and free the boys. But during his rescue attempt, the car suddenly swung back into place, causing him to lose his balance. He fell, hitting several cars on the way down before crashing to the ground. Luckily, he survived with only a broken finger and a few minor cuts. The boys were escorted safely to their mothers. Shockingly, the Ferris wheel was deemed safe after investigation and returned to operation the following day. Green Mountain Park. On Wednesday evening, July 31st, 2025, at Green Mountain Park in Taif, Saudi Arabia, a 360 big pendulum ride catastrophically failed while in operation. While riders were strapped in and screaming from the thrill, the brake caused the gondola and support structure to collapse. As the ride turned to make another 360-degree rotation, the central support column snapped in two, causing the passenger arm to crash to the ground, with the pendulum striking some of the riders. As it hit the floor, emergency services responded quickly, with local healthcare facilities declaring a code yellow, a mass casualty protocol. 23 people were injured, with 3 in critical condition. Luckily, no one died. The Taif government ordered the immediate shutdown of the park. The full investigation is ongoing. Oceana Water World. The Oceana Water Park was the second phase of Iceberg's major expansion. But what was meant to transform Gothenburg's Iceberg Park into a multi-season tourism hub soon turned deadly. As the opening date approached, the park was still not fully operational, and workers were running final tests on each attraction. On the morning of February 12, 2024, construction workers tested the fire alarm before leaving it non-operational in test mode. Just a few hours later, smoke began to rise inside the massive structure. Diversion pipes under the Rattler side had recently been welded by electrofusion. Unfortunately, the pipe had not fitted in properly, which led to overheating. The alarm, still in test mode, never sounded to warn workers. Everyone just went about their business. Although some could smell a burning pipe, no one knew where it came from. Within minutes, thick black smoke engulfed the site, rising high above Gothenburg's skyline. One of the workers immediately called the site manager, Patrick Gilholm, to inform him about the rising smoke. The line suddenly disconnected. In a split second, the €110 million project burst into flames. The fire spread rapidly through the building, fueled by plastics, wood, and exposed construction materials. Inside, confused workers struggled to escape through the smoke-filled corridors. Fire crews rushed to the scene. It was then that the workers realized Patrick was nowhere to be found. He was still inside the building. As firefighters battled the blazing inferno, a rescue team entered the building in a desperate search for Patrick. They were guided into the tower where Patrick had been inspecting. Within a few minutes, thick black smoke began to fill the tower, and they had to evacuate without finding Patrick. Hours passed, but the flames did not stop burning, and Patrick remained missing. By 7 p.m., they contacted his family and informed them about the situation. The fire kept burning through the night. By February 13th, most of the poisonous smoke had subsided, so the rescue team made another risky entry into the wreckage. Inside, their worst fear was confirmed. Patrick's lifeless body was found lying amidst the debris. What was supposed to be a place of laughter and happiness had turned into tragedy. The fire lasted 3 days before anyone could enter without the risk of debris falling on them. The Oceana will be rebuilt and reopened in 2026. The Big Dipper crash. The Battlesea Fun Fair had opened in 1951 as part of the Festival of Britain, with the Big Dipper quickly becoming the most popular ride. However, by 1972, the ride had gone through numerous repairs and redesigns. The Big Dipper was no longer what it used to be. It had become a ticking time bomb. On May 30th, 1972, around 2:30 p.m., the Big Dipper loaded 30 passengers, laughing and ready to take the adventure of a lifetime. Like previous trips, it started slowly, making its way up the first hill amidst creaking noise and the loud laughter of its passengers. But just before the first peak, something changed. The haulage rope snapped, and the train began hurtling backwards down the track. As the momentum built up, the brakemen desperately tried to pull the emergency brakes, but they failed to engage. Because the incline was steep, the train accelerated uncontrollably, making it impossible for operators to stop it manually. The first car derailed from the track as it made its way around a corner before plunging 15 feet below. The other two cars crashed into a stationary train and smashed into a wooden hoarding. Laughter quickly turned to screams of horror as some passengers were flung out. Some were hanging upside down over the railings and others lay helplessly on the floor. The sudden impact injured 13 people, and 5 others tragically lost their lives. Shockingly, as emergency workers rushed to help, the fun fair continued as usual, with guests continuing to queue for other rides, but someone needed to be held accountable. A public investigation was carried out, and inspectors found that the ride had a total of 51 defects, 18 of them in the support of the structure. Among other issues, there were only 4 emergency brakes inside of 8, and even worse, only one of them was actually working. One of the engineers had even slipped while carrying out the investigation. It was now evident that the Big Dipper was a literal death trap. The Big Dipper was dismantled and replaced with a modern steel roller coaster known as the Cyclone, but the Battlesea Fun Fair never went back to normal. The numbers kept decreasing until it eventually closed in 1974. Level 4. Ladybug Adventureland. On August 30th, 2005, 18-year-old Stephen Gary would operate his last ride. It was 15 minutes to closing time, and Gary, who had been operating the Ladybug coaster since June, was alone at the controls. No passengers were aboard. Somehow, Stephen slipped onto the track and fell face down with his head and neck in the gap between the tracks. Before he could free himself, he was struck by the first car on the kiddie ride, which was still connected to the rest of the train. About a dozen cars stopped just over his back. A visitor saw him and screamed for help. His colleagues rushed to pull him out, using a hoist to lift the heavy carts off him. At the scene, he was responsive and alert. As he was wheeled into the emergency room at Nassau University Medical Center in East Meadow, he reassured his mother, "Mummy, don't cry, I'll be all right." But a few hours later, he was pronounced dead. The Ladybug ride was temporarily closed, but the rest of the park remained open. However, a day later, tragedy struck again. Top Scan, Adventureland. The very next day, 45-year-old Barbara Brady was at Adventureland as part of a day therapy session with a group of 24 other people and 5 chaperones. At the time, she was mentally disabled and was living in a community home. After a long queue for the Top Scan, Barbara and the others finally got to the front of the queue and boarded the ride. She was seated beside one of her chaperones when the unexpected happened. The safety harness on Barbara's seat snapped, and she was tossed out. In a split second, she flew over the 20-foot exterior fence and into the parking lot before landing on a car. Park staff stopped the ride immediately, and emergency services rushed to her aid. Barbara was later pronounced dead at the hospital. In just 2 days, the park recorded 2 deaths, the first tragedies in its 43-year history. Investigators later revealed that the safety harness malfunction was due to the park's negligence. The Top Scan ride was immediately closed, and the park accepted full responsibility, offering compensation to the victim's family. Kylie, On June 9, 1989, 13-year-old Kylie King and her friends were having a fun-filled day at the Lagoon Amusement Park in Farmington, Utah. They had gone through various adventure rides and decided it was time to board the White Roller Coaster ride. This was not Kylie's first ride on the White Roller Coaster. Usually, as the ride went downhill, she would lean forward in her seat and raise her hands. The lap bar normally caught her in place, but not this time. Around 5:45 p.m., she sat in the front row, ready to be thrilled once again. As the ride descended the second hill, Kylie stood up slightly as she usually did, but this time the lap bar could not restrain her. The car literally slipped from under her, and she fell from a height of 35 feet. She lost her life immediately on impact. The White Roller Coaster was quickly closed following the accident. Investigations later revealed that the ride had actually not malfunctioned. The lap bar relied on pressure from the rider's body, but Kylie's small build did not fill the bar completely, leaving enough space for her to slip. The incident was ruled a tragic accident, and the ride was eventually reopened. The lightning loops. Many people have imagined the horror they'd feel if the widely used over-the-shoulder roller coaster restraints failed to lock properly. But in June 1987, Karen Brown and her boyfriend felt this horror firsthand. In June 1987, she had been at the Six Flags Great Adventure Park with her boyfriend and friends. They all decided to go on the lightning loops, a pair of intertwined steel shuttle loop roller coasters. But when others had successfully secured their harnesses, Karen could not clip hers. She was struggling with it when the ride began its descent. As it gained momentum, Karen's boyfriend screamed for the operator to stop, but it was either mistaken for excitement or lost among the screams from other riders. Before it could complete its first loop, her boyfriend watched in horror as she was thrown from her seat and fell 75 feet to the ground below. Karen Brown was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. An investigation by the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office concluded that the lightning loop itself was working perfectly. However, staff had failed to ensure that all safety harnesses were properly secured before starting the ride. As a result, the park was fined the maximum penalty of $1,000, and the ride was temporarily closed for inspection. It was reopened on October 10, 1987, after safety measures were reinforced. Level 5. Flying Chairs, Hunan, China. The Flying Chairs ride at an amusement park in Chaoyang County, Hunan, China was designed to give riders a taste of what it feels like to fly. But in February 2021, it gave them a taste of pure terror. Riders were high above the park enjoying the thrill of the flying chair when it suddenly malfunctioned. The central support structure suffered a mechanical failure and the entire ride suddenly collapsed to the ground. Due to the sudden impact, 16 people were injured, 3 of them critically. Thankfully, none of them lost their lives. The ride and park were immediately shut down, and Chinese authorities began a safety investigation. Local authorities ruled out human error as the primary factor in the incident. Instead, they later suggested that the structural welds or support system broke, likely from poor maintenance or overuse. Slingshot Ride, Luna Park. Riders were in a slingshot ride at Luna Park in Cap d'Agde, France, when a cable suddenly snapped, plunging the park into chaos. The slingshot ride is basically a reverse bungee. A winch system pulls the capsule down to the loading position and stretches the cord like a slingshot. When released, the capsule launches skyward at extreme speed. It then bounces up and down between the towers several times until it slows down and lands safely. But in August 2015, during a ride, the capsule launched skyward, but one of its cables attaching it to the towers suddenly snapped. With only one side attached, the capsule swung violently in the air and smashed into one of the metal support towers. Onlookers screamed as emergency services struggled to reach the riders. The capsule's twisted cords and damaged frame made it unstable, so rescuers couldn't just pull it down quickly without risking further injury to the trapped riders. Firefighters used a crane to carefully reach the capsule, secure it, and stabilize the riders before lowering them to safety. After an hour, they successfully rescued both of them. One rider, a 24-year-old woman, suffered a broken leg, while the other passenger escaped with minor bruises. The slingshot ride was shut down immediately. Adrenaline, Luna Park. On August 5th, 2023, tragedy struck at Luna Park in Cap d'Agde, France again, when a 17-year-old boy was thrown from the park's adrenaline ride, also known as the Twister. The Adrenaline is a tall vertical tower over 180 feet high. Riders lie face down and are secured with full-body harnesses. A winch pulls the riders to the top of the tower, leaving them suspended in mid-air, gazing down at the ground. At the peak, the riders are released to fall freely in a giant pendulum swing. On that day, however, conditions took a dangerous turn. A sudden and rare gust of wind swept through the area as the riders were released. In the chaos, a 17-year-old was violently ejected from his harness. He struck his head against one of the ride's support beams before falling all the way to the ground. He died instantly on impact. A 19-year-old woman sharing the ride with him was also thrown from her harness. She suffered critical injuries from the fall but was quickly stabilized by emergency responders. She survived after being rushed to the hospital. The ride was shut down immediately, and authorities launched a criminal investigation for unintentional homicide and injuries. 4 individuals, including the park manager, were placed in custody for questioning. Subsequently, the park manager offered to pay for the victim's funeral. He also vowed that the adrenaline ride would be permanently dismantled so that no similar tragedy could ever occur there again. Level 6. Drop Tower. During a crowded fair in Mohali, Punjab, a drop tower ride carrying about 50 passengers suddenly plummeted 50 feet below. In a drop tower, riders are slowly lifted high before being released to free fall down a vertical structure. Normally, such rides slow down gradually using magnetic or hydraulic brake systems before coming to a stop safely at the base. But on this occasion, something went wrong. The circular carriage holding the passengers suddenly plummeted to the ground and slammed into the base with full force. The glass panels of the safety barricades surrounding the ride shattered, sending glass shards through the air. Panic broke out. People yelled, and bystanders ran away from the ride for safety. Several riders were thrown forward violently, and some even hit their heads and faces on the safety bars. At least 16 people were injured in the crash, some of them critically. A lot of the victims suffered neck and back injuries, fractures, and head traumas. To make matters worse, the fair organizers reportedly fled the scene, which worsened the public outrage. They were later taken into custody for negligence and endangerment. Subsequent investigations revealed that a mechanical failure in the braking system caused the crash. The ride was immediately shut down, and the fairgrounds were sealed off by the police. Level 7. Hammer Ride. In 2022, at the Expo Regional de Canandaigua held in Paloma, Paraguay, a schoolgirl found herself hanging upside down on a kamikaze-type ride. The ride had started normally, but it soon took an unexpected turn. The girl, who had been sitting properly, had to hang on for safety when her safety belt suddenly disengaged. Her legs were dangling outside the cabin 65 feet above the ground. All of this unfolded because the operator had pressed an incorrect button. Luckily, her screams alerted the City Park amusement park staff, and they stopped the ride. The remaining passengers held her in place firmly enough to prevent a fall. The ride slowly descended, and she was escorted down safely. She left with minor injuries to 2 fingers, shaken but alive. Terminal Velocity. The Terminal Velocity ride at Extreme World in Wisconsin Dells was a unique attraction that drew attention due to its approach to the free fall experience. It was equal parts thrilling and dangerous. Unlike other rides that attach the rider with a harness to a seat or a track, the Terminal Velocity allowed them to drop face down in a true free fall. It relied on a safety net stretched across a steel frame and supported by airbags to catch the rider and absorb the impact of the fall. On July 30th, 2010, after much persuasion, Tegan Marty's parents decided to take her to Extreme World so she could go on her dream ride, the Terminal Velocity. After waiting in a long queue, it was finally her turn. After putting on her safety gear, the ride operator, Charles Carnell, gave her a little mental preparation before releasing her in a free fall. Little did he know that the airbags had not been inflated and the net hadn't been positioned. In other words, there was nothing there to catch her. Tegan landed hard on her back with a heavy thud. Charles watched in horror as Tegan lay on the floor, blood streaming from her ears and nose. Her parents, who had been watching, ran to her side while waiting for emergency services to arrive. Her father and another guest tried to give her CPR, but Tegan's eyes were rolling to the back of her head, and her bleeding would not stop. She was rushed to the American Family Children's Hospital by air ambulance for critical treatment. Tegan had suffered multiple spinal fractures, a crushed pelvis, brain swelling, and internal organ lacerations. Miraculously, her brain was not damaged. She spent a month at the American Family Children's Hospital before being transferred to Jackson Memorial Hospital's pediatric ICU in Miami. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the ride was shut down. An investigation determined that Charles Carnell did not wait for the safety signal from the operator on the ground before sending Tegan below. He was charged and pleaded no contest to second-degree reckless injury. He was only fined $268 in court fees. For Tegan, she had a long way to go. She had to learn how to walk, talk, and live again. She had to undergo rigorous therapy for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, to help her regain her strength. In 2012, she returned to the hospital where her life was saved with just the help of a walker stronger than ever. Lulu. In 2016, the Cinco de Mayo festival took place in Omaha, Nebraska. Amidst the colors, food, music, dance, games, and rides lay a disaster waiting to happen. On that day, 11-year-old Elizabeth Lulu Gilreath had left home with her friends to attend the annual festival. They decided to go on the King's Crown. Elizabeth got on the ride with her long flowing red hair down to her shoulders, smiling and excited. Little did she know that it was about to turn horrific. The King's Crown is a high-speed spinning carnival ride that has a circular pattern with seats around the edge. While it spins, the whole circular platform usually tilts at an angle to give riders a feeling of swooping or being lifted. As the ride spun, Elizabeth's hair whipped around and some of it slipped behind her seat, near exposed machinery and rotating parts. Her hair suddenly became entangled in the gear system. The faster the ride spun, the harder her hair yanked. She started to scream and people on board yelled for the operator to stop the ride, but it wouldn't stop. It just kept going. By this time, her hair had been torn out and her scalp was pulling. The operator was seen running from the scene, possibly to get help. A bystander decided to take matters into her hands. She rushed to the ride and physically turned it with her hands to make it stop. By the time Elizabeth was pulled out, she was bleeding uncontrollably. Bystanders used their shirts as a tourniquet while they waited for emergency services. The ride was closed immediately. Elizabeth was taken to Nebraska Medicine, where she went through trauma treatment. After 2 head surgeries, 3 skin grafts, 1 eye surgery, and 28 blood transfusions, she was stabilized but had a long road to recovery. Pulling was so severe that it tore the muscles around her eye, and doctors were not sure if she was ever going to see or speak again. But miraculously, Elizabeth Lulu made a full recovery. There were too many segments in this video to fully cover, so we decided to make another volume. Check them out at our other channel where we will post volume 3 and so forth, keeping content here fresh and unique.